For 25 years. So someone tell me, what have you learned about the ADA this week, just really briefly?
That with this law, it allows prevents everybody from discriminating against people who have disabilities.
Okay. Anything else? What else have you learned?
Whatever difficulty you have, like you still.
Okay. All right. Did you guys learn at all about how the ADA was passed?
Did Joe tell you how they got the ADA law passed? Did Joe talk about that?
When they came into the Capitol and started, they started doing chants in like the middle of the Capitol.
Yeah. So it's funny that Joe had already covered that. I was going to talk about that a little bit, but what I want to talk to you guys about today is this idea, right, that the ADA is really important, and it's really important because the ADA says that we have the same kind of equal rights as people with disabilities as any other American. And it's really important because 30 years ago, before the ADA was passed, if you had a disability and you tried to go into a business and, maybe you tried to go to a movie theater, right, and see a movie with your friends, the movie theater could say, well, no, you have a disability. You can't be here unless you have your caregiver, your mom, your dad, right? And is that fair?
No.
Is that equal?
No.
And so what happened with the ADA is that the ADA changed all that. The ADA said you can't, like you said, you can't discriminate. You can't say you as a person with a disability are less than anybody else. Right, so the ADA is really important because it makes us equal, right? But when we talk about the ADA, a lot of times it's important to understand how it was that the ADA was passed, right? And I don't know if Joe talked about this, but the ADA was passed in 1990. But the ADA was actually introduced in 1987, and it failed. And in 1988, and it failed.
Can you tell them what failed means? When you say it failed, can you tell them what that means?
Yeah. So when a bill becomes a law, right, it has to go through all of this different legislative process. And if it doesn't make it through that process, or if it gets before the legislature and they vote no, that means the bill doesn't pass, that it fails, right? And so the ADA didn't pass in 1987, it didn't pass in 1988, and it didn't pass in 1989. So all these people that had disabilities, all kinds of people with disabilities, they were really angry about this, right? Because this is a bill that protects our equal rights and our ability to be the same as anybody else. And they really wanted this bill to pass.
Yeah, but like, one thing I want to say, like, I wish people would, say, treat others as you wish to be treated.
Right. But if people don't understand, if there's not a law that says that people have to treat people with disabilities equally, there are a lot of people who aren't going to treat us equally. And that's why laws are important, right? Because they say you have to treat someone equally, even if you don't want to. So you want to know why the ADA didn't pass before 1990?
Yes.
There are a whole lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is that businesses were really afraid that that following the ADA was going to be really expensive, right? That
it was all about money.
Yeah, they were afraid. They said, well, it would be really expensive for us to put a ramp on our business so that somebody with a wheelchair could go in, or it might be really expensive for us to get a piece of software that somebody with a visual impairment could use to access the computer. And so they said, that's nice that you want your equal rights, but it's too expensive. And is that a bad reason to not give somebody their equal rights? Yeah, it's a real bad reason to not give somebody their equal rights. And so what happened is you kind of had three groups of people who were working on the ADA. You had policymakers and legislators and staff, like the kind of people you're going to be testifying in front of later today. And they were working on all the real technical parts that you have to have in order for something to become a law, right? And then you had advocates and people with disabilities who, they wore suits and they testified and they had good relationships with lawmakers. And then you had advocates like me and like all of you who we don't necessarily have very good connections with policymakers, but we think that something is very important, right? And when we think that something is very important, we're going to step up and we're going to talk about it and we're going to make sure it happens, right? So that group of people that Joe told you about, who came in and they crawled up the Capitol steps, you want to know why they crawled up the Capitol steps?
Because there was no ramp.
There wasn't a ramp, right? So they crawled up the Capitol steps to say, look, this is how we have to get into the Capitol. Is this fair? No, you need to pass this law. So they crawled up the Capitol steps and they took over the Capitol Rotunda. And when you take over the Capitol Rotunda, I've done it myself, actually.
Do you know what she's talking about, Capitol Rotunda? Is it that middle room where you look up? And it's really far up there. It's the stars up in the middle.
And actually, the Texas Capitol Rotunda looks exactly like the Capitol Rotunda in the U.S. Capitol. Mm-hmm. So if you go in there,
Washington, D.C.,
and you see that space, it's a different space, but it's kind of set up the same way, right? And if you pack a whole bunch of people into that room, you block off all the hallways, you block off all the stairways, you block off all of this middle part of the Capitol, and nobody can go back and forth. So what happened is they literally stopped all of the business that was going on in the Capitol because nobody could get back and forth to the different parts of the Capitol. And nobody could hear what was going on because they were chanting so loud, right? And so people came down and people said all of a sudden, well, this must be really important, right? This law must be really important if people are willing to shut down the Capitol and if they're willing to get arrested and to go to jail for this law, right? Not everybody has to get arrested and go to jail, you know, and not everybody has to be an expert on policy, but it's really important as people with disabilities that we have enough respect for ourselves and enough understanding of what we need, the accommodations that we need, to be able to ask for those accommodations. And when somebody says, no, I can't give you that accommodation, to be able to say, no, I need this, right? So that's what those advocates did. They said, you know, you didn't pass this law a year ago, you didn't pass this law 2 years ago, and we need this law. So you're not respecting us, but we're going to respect ourselves enough to take over the Capitol and to demand it, right? And so when we think about the ADA, you know, I want you to think about what it means for you to respect yourself, right? Because the ADA gives us a means to say we respect ourselves, and so we have a right to ask for these things. So when you testify today in front of these, everybody you're going to be testifying in front of, they're not legislators, because the legislators, it's Friday. And usually what happens on Fridays is the representatives and the senators, they go back to their districts or where they're from, and they meet with people in their districts on Fridays and over the weekend, and they're here sort of Monday through Thursday. So the people that you're going to be testifying in front of are their staff, right? And staff are actually really important because you only have one legislator, it's only one person, and this one person can't do everything, right? There's a lot of things to do when you're a legislator, and so you can't do everything. So you hire staff to talk to people who come into your office, to learn about different issues that are important, and this kind of thing. So you're going to be talking to those people who do a lot of work on all of the issues that are important to us. And actually, all the legislative aides that you're going to be testifying in front of, they're our friends here at the Capitol. These are people who have done a lot of work on bills that are really important to people with disabilities. And you want to know what happens when you go and you sign up to testify on a bill, or you make a phone call to your legislator and you say, hey, this bill is really important? You know what happens? Any ideas?
Does anybody know what happens when you call and tell them you want to talk to them about a specific bill?
Do they get part of that? They listen.
Yeah. So
They listen.
So when you call, even if they don't want to talk to you, right? Even if they say, well, I only have 5 seconds, or I'm really busy right now. Every time somebody calls and they say, this issue is important to me, they write it down, right? And so if you have 25 people who call in because they think it's important that schools do a better job helping students with disabilities transition into adulthood, if 25 people call in, they say, oh, this must be really important. And if you show up to a hearing and you sign up to testify, and they say, oh, 10 people have signed up to testify on this issue, it must be really important, right? And that's 10 people. Imagine if 100 people showed up or 200 people showed up. If everybody gets 3 minutes to testify, and there are 100 people who show up to testify, that's like
2 days.
Almost 4 hours of testimony. And they have to sit and they have to listen to everybody for 3 minutes. And so if you make phone calls, if you send letters, if you show up and testify, that's one really powerful way to show that these issues are important and that these issues matter. Even though it might be kind of boring to sit there and wait your turn, and it might be kind of boring to listen to what other people have to say. And I can tell you this is boring because I spend a lot of time at the Capitol waiting to testify. A lot of the work that I do is here in this building with a lot of people that you're going to meet today. And so sometimes it can be really boring, but at the end of the day, right, you're making a difference for people who aren't able to be here to speak. You're making a difference for people who maybe they can't call in for whatever reason. And so every little bit of advocacy you do, whether you advocate with a legislator or you advocate with your boss or you advocate with a teacher, it's very important, because if you don't use your voice, nobody else is going to use your voice for you. So,
do you remember the Find Your Voice activity we did? I think these guys have found their voice.
Awesome.
Sarah.
Good.
They have.
I'm excited to hear all your testimony today. And I was here yesterday. I was talking to people from the offices who you're going to be testifying in front of, and they are really excited that you guys are coming. So I think it's going to be fun. So when you get bored this afternoon, just remember you're making a difference. So.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.